Hello, welcome to my podcast. I'm your host, Larry Liu, and today I'm joined by Aman Waheed. He's a fellow Jack and Cook Foundation scholar, and thank you very much for taking the time to be on.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, by the way.
Sure, yeah. So let's start a little bit about your biography, and then we'll talk about your interests. So you said you grew up in um, Afghanistan, is that right?
Yes, yes. My family originally from Afghanistan. My parents both grew up in Kabul. Spent some time there. Traveled a little bit during because there was war at the time with the Taliban taking power. Moved over to New York and then stayed in Philadelphia. Ultimately, where I would spend most of my years growing up, spending most of my times through elementary school and middle school. Spent a year in high school in there as well, and then moved over to Virginia. And then at that point, just kind of got my associate's degree and bachelor's degree, both nearby. And yeah, that's just kind of my journey through there. But now my family's kind of spread out, but immediate family here in Virginia.
That's great. Yeah. So you mentioned the war. So maybe reorient the listeners to the precise timeline because I know that the Taliban they must have taken over around the 90s, right? So there was a period where the Soviet Union
Yes.
was active there. They occupied the territory. They were supporting the regime there. And then they were displaced, I think, probably in the 90s. I want to say probably like early 90s. And then eventually you had the Taliban that came in. And then of course you had the 9/11 attacks, right, in New York, which was then uh well it was blamed on Osama bin Laden, but bin Laden he had a base in in Afghanistan, is it correct? And so then the argument, by the Bush administration was that, that the, U.S. would have to, replace that, the Taliban regime. Um, and so when did you leave the country?
Yeah, for us, we left in I want to say I don't the exact year is a little bit rough, but um, probably somewhere around the 2000s, really early 2000s. At that time, I think I was roughly around 5 years old, so maybe 2000, 2001. Afghanistan's history is very, very colored, if you will. There's a lot that's recently happened in development, mostly being struck in due dealing with wars because, the Afghan people are very prideful. Um, it's landlocked. It's a very big strategic play for a lot of countries, but, Afghan people don't want to be occupied. And, through that occupation, you're going to have, whether it be some outlaws or some fighting forces that don't necessarily represent all the Afghan people, but when you have such intense battles like that, that's what's going to happen. So originally it was due to Mujahideen, and then it was the Taliban, um, and the Taliban mostly they're mostly trained and they're housed actually nearby in Pakistan. Um, so Osama bin Laden originally he was Saudi Arabian and through the support of the Saudi government and living shelter sort of in Pakistan, it just makes it very possible for kind of him to live as long as he did. But it is a very color history, and there's a lot of issues with it. But that's kind of a side conversation.
Yeah, so and you have there's not a real border, right, between the Pakistan and Afghanistan, right? So you have and also like the ethnic group there, the Pashtuns, correct? That are Kind of some of them are in the Pakistan region,
Hmm.
some of them are in the Afghanistan region, and so potentially, I think,
Right.
I mean, so there was a decision. I think it was the British, right, when they were, originally colonizing that region, and they decided to draw up the boundaries in those ways. But they're kind
Mm.
of not like the natural, boundaries of the, local populations that were, living in those regions, right? So that's definitely, yeah, important, historical asterisk. And then of course they came back to the Taliban then came back to power again a few years ago. And yeah, so okay, yeah, so yeah, I don't know if you do you want to add anything else to the history, or do you want to?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I would say that that was a pretty decent run through that kind of about the region. But the one thing I just try to tell people that, with Afghanistan is that ethnically originally the people were Pashtun, as you were saying. So the truth is, I don't want to start any sort of like controversies, but this is just straight up the truth. All Pashtun people are pretty much Afghan, like every single one. They don't abide by any borders. So as when the British came in, and like you said, a lot of people being involved, especially in Afghanistan's politics, caused, this sort of this split and then this rift, and then some Pashtun people stayed in Pakistan and some Pashtun people stayed in Afghanistan, but all of them are ethnically Afghan. There's no, there's nothing people can. I guess maybe like in terms of their um, country and the country they abide by, but ethnically they would just all be Afghan. And then Afghanistan itself is a country of just basically a bunch of tribes, immigrants from other parts of Central Asia, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, um, and there's honestly so many tribes. It's kind of hard to keep through. But no, the actual Afghan people, they're not. If you ask really even a regular Afghan person, a villager or city person, they're not gonna care or know about any quote unquote drawn borders because it's one of those things where they're gonna be like there's no country that can determine borders for us, and that's just how they'll take it. And whether what side you agree or disagree on is that this is just how the people see it. So there is an official border, but is that border really being abided to? Probably not. Is what I can tell you. But it is a very, very colored, very rich history. A lot has happened there in 20, 30 years. And like you said, they, recently um, came into power again. And it's just gonna, be a very interesting and unique experience for the foreseeable future until hopefully the Afghan people can persevere once more. I think that might take some time, but hopefully after there's peace going on, and hopefully a new administration and people in power, we can see it. But we'll see. Well, I'm very hopeful.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the main lesson, I mean, so looking at it, not internally from the Afghan, but from the U.S. foreign policy standpoint, I think it shows that, that external powers, like including the United States, they will have a very hard time to do, what they call nation building. I'm sure you're familiar with this whole
Mm.
discourse that the neoconservative establishment under the George Bush administration was advancing, and and even though, I mean, and also like under Obama, you saw an increase in the U.S. troops in Afghanistan, and I mean, from what I understood, I mean, there was not a lot of control that the you could say that the pro-Western government in that was still in charge up until 3 years ago didn't have too much control outside of the big cities, I guess in Kabul. And yeah, so I guess it is, difficult at best to to do nation building, and I would say, at least from the outside. And you know, and I don't know whether it was a worthwhile attempt to do so. But what is your assessment of, like, was it a good idea to intervene from the U.S. perspective? I mean, or
Hmm.
uh, it was kind of not a good choice.
Yeah, I think it's a tough question. I know, um, and by the way, I'm happy to answer any question however you want to steer it. But just in terms of the Afghan people, I think, when you're trying to move into another country and trying to influence politics and power. I mean, it's almost like and it's just a hypothetical here, but you tell me, like, does that always sound like it's going to work out well or be good? Just because every country is run to their belief system and to their laws, and sometimes some countries are not necessarily going to agree with some Western ideologies. Some countries are religious countries. Some countries are more open and free with a lot of their policies. At least it seems like it. Um, and some countries are just going to be a little bit more protective of its people. And sometimes you're going to have some parts of the government that are good that we like, especially in the U.S., and some parts that we're going to dislike. Same thing with living, in that type of country where, and people, believe it or not, in like the '60s and '70s, and even actually, even if I go further back, like if you go down to the early 1920s to like when even when the Beatles were really popular, um, there was really a lot of prosper and promise in Afghanistan because they lived in a relatively religious country, but they did have influence from the West. They would dress very elegant. They would often spend a lot of time hanging out with each other. It's like, honestly, if you didn't know where you were, you would have probably just felt like this is like a normal school, even if you grew up in the States. But obviously, during times of war, that's when a lot of this influence can take over because like I said, when you come to a country, even if a country's peaceful, and for whatever reason there's unrest, people are not going to always respond well to it. And then over the 10, 20 years, you're going to have a generation that's going to be influenced by unrest. And then they're personally going to unleash their own version of that unrest personality, or because of that influence, they're going to just be more uh, either secure or just be more careful with any decision they make. And, that'll lead to people be making maybe more indecisive decisions about their life or just kind of being more sporadic. And I think that's sort of what happened is like you have some people who are more strict about what they believe in, and you're gonna have more some people who are um, just want to dish out a lot of the resentment or a lot of the civil unrest that happened to them when they grew up, and then that kind of causes a lot of people to be conflicted among each other and then causes issues. So early on, you could see a lot, especially early in the 1900s in Afghanistan. A lot of people were going to school, living just like every other people. But like I said, like when countries come in and try to be influential and then leave, that's just what's going to happen. Is like you're going to get unrest, and the generations after are going to be affected by it. So nobody really wins in a war, and nobody really wins during times of unrest, and that's kind of what happened. I think the fortunate thing is it went through such deep and dark times. It sort of influenced the people to take on sort of that character, and that's kind of what you see going on, especially now.
And so, are you saying that, so among the common population, that um, they sort of kind of support, the Taliban government, not so much because they agree so much with, like, religious policies or the programs, but because they are seen as an, you could say, anti-Western force, in a sense that because the Westerners were the ones that were, occupying the country, that in a way that supporting the Taliban was a way to, uh, I guess, oppose the Western occupation, I suppose.
Well, what I can tell you is that people. It's a tough question because I haven't. It's not like I live there and I talk to people every day there. But I think actions are very impactful and actions are very telling. I think like when they officially took power, you saw how people were scared. Is because they actually don't like this government. It's because they actually feel like this is going the wrong way. And people who care about certain parts of their life, especially like people who want to flourish economically, flourish like with their lifestyle, or you name it, they're going to have an issues with this. And I know sometimes it can seem like it might be different, but I really don't think it's different than really any other country, maybe in a different version, right? Just like maybe in some parts of the country, they might have more control of your phone and more control of your social media accounts and all that. That's just a different form of it. So, to the Afghan people, and I think a lot of them, I can't say all of them, but a lot of them, they really felt like we were going backwards, and you know, and I think that's why they decided to leave, and that's why you saw so many of them be sporadic about it because they knew what the government was going to be like in the next 10, 20 years. So I would say a lot of people were relatively unhappy, but I think the thing to realize is people, especially who are Afghan or grew up in religious places, like they do want to express their religion. They do want to um, but they also want to be themselves. They don't want to be constricted. It's a tough question to answer because that would mean I know literally how every single person is going to want to respond, and I think that's a tough thing to do. But I think you can assess the general people and realize that they're still religious. They're still they still want to live their life a certain way, but at the same time they don't want to be put into a certain type of pressure where they're forced to, whether it be not they can't go to school, or maybe they can't work a certain job, or maybe there's not as much economic opportunity. I mean, if you really think about it, people are really not that much different regardless of where they are in the world than you would think, is what I'm trying to get at. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, I mean the controversy, I guess, that we know about is, the role, the status of women, right? They were able to go to school, they were able to get the education and obtain jobs, and now this is kind of you know discouraged slash prohibited by the government there.
I do
And
want to add one small point there. Um, when I'm trying to talk all this stuff about you, I'm not trying to so much go and influence people about my personal take because I want everyone to, kind of assess their own idea. But, you know, what I will say is that for some of the people who I hear that are very encouraging of this new government, I just ask you to just be a little bit careful to kind of think it through what you're really saying, because every decision has a cost, right? So even if you try to come in there and for example, try to get drugs, as much drugs off the streets, or there's not fighting going on, and but just kind of assess what the real meaning behind that is, because if the people in power are living well and very powerful, and other people are not living well, um, regardless of what you're trying to accomplish, just really ask yourself: is that a government, or is that a country you would personally feel comfortable to be a part of? So there's nothing wrong. I don't think violence is going to be the answer, but there's nothing wrong with fighting for what you believe in and protesting for what you believe in. And unfortunately, those rights are just not as accessible as it is in this government. So I just wanted to add that point for people who kind of see good things on social media, and or see a few podcasts, or see other videos, and it looks good. Just be very, very careful, and just ask yourself why.
well, I mean, I would say certainly, I mean, the social restrictions, the restrictions on the women's rights, I think that's, I mean, it's from the Western perspective, I would say, yeah, it's a bad trend. But it's something that
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, but then the issue again from the U.S. foreign policy perspective is whether the West is capable of performing nation building from the outside. I mean, so I'm not defending at all what the Taliban government has been doing. I'm just saying that that it is difficult or questionable whether the Western governments uh, would be able to, you could say, massively change the trajectory of another country, right?
Mhm.
Um, so, uh, but yeah, I mean, that's but yeah, it is quite a complex matter because I mean, if you go outside of Afghanistan, I mean, what's happening in Syria, for instance, or elsewhere. I mean, I think there's you know basically the way I understand it. I mean, there's a lot of outside powers, right, that are you know extending their arms into that country, right? Like the Iranians, the Russians, the Turks, the Americans, and the Israelis, right? So and effectively, they're carving up the that country into their spheres of influence, and I think that this is a major driver of the political instability, and it's bad news certainly for all the people that are living in that country, right? You
Mhm.
know, they I don't think anybody wakes up and thinks, yeah, it's great to be in a war-torn country. I think it's an absolute travesty. But
Right.
uh, but then but then you don't have a choice in some sense. You're a smaller country. You're going to be facing a lot of external pressure from other powers in the region. And so yeah, and it means more political instability. And I know that this means that there's also, I mean, for the Western countries, there's a lot of pressure to migrate um, into the Western countries, in parts because of the political destabilization that's happening in kind of the Middle East region. Yeah, so um, yeah, do you see a way to kind of like is there a way to you could say reduce the amount of tension in the broader region, or that's
Absolutely.
just a dream?
Absolutely. I think what you're asking is a good question, and um, I think there is a way, but I think what makes it tough is you have to realize about all of the factors and resources that comes into play. For example, if we're talking about any country really, and you allow them to sort of be on their own, and there's going to be an opportunity for them to learn and get better and uh, make good use of the resources they have, because every country has shown that and done that. Really, every country has done that if you think about it. But when you understand, as you mentioned, there are outside influences and factors, and there's just going to be moments where, sometimes a country gets caught in a crossfire, or sometimes a country is, it gets influenced by another country, or decisions are made about that country without that country's necessary partaking. And I think that's what happened with Afghanistan. A lot of decisions have been made, and people have tried to influence a country that sort of never really got a chance to be on its own and run on its own. And unfortunately, I wouldn't say now is equivalent to that, because now you have a political power, uh, the political power being placed on someone that was a result of instability. So that's a different question. I think there is a way, and really it starts with education. We've seen countries like South Korea. We've seen countries, even Iran, for a long period of time, where as long as they have a little bit of opportunity and window, it just takes a few generations It won't happen overnight. It'll take 20 years really, and once the entire country becomes educated and um, just there's talent there, then there's always a chance. And because people who are talented and people who have an education and uh, people who just are very resourceful, they quickly learn is that their life really is has meaning, and they are able to do many things. And sometimes, war and fighting and all this stuff is not the answer, because they're gonna want to make themselves very prosperous. They're gonna want to make their family prosperous, and there's only really one way to do it, and that's to be show etiquette, and that is to be ethical. And we will see that particularly in places that have that opportunity to be educated. So it really starts with education. Um, and unfortunately, as it stands now in that country where education is just not a vocal point, especially for um, young women, it's gonna take even more time. That's how I would see it. And but it needs an opportunity. Once there's no war, once there's no violence, and once a country can get an opportunity to stand on its feet and rebuild, it has time to allocate those resources on things that like any other country would, and that is to prosper in all those other ways that would make them successful, whether it be economically, academically, religiously. I can just keep going on and on down the list. But during times of war and violence, you spend all that time in war and violence. You're not going to spend that time doing those things that would help get you to the next level. And like I said, I think you can draw a parallel to a lot of things in life, just like, you know, as we grew up in this Western society, especially in the US, we were able to go to school, we were able to play sports, we were able to learn. You see a lot of the people who took advantage of those resources, how they are now. And a lot of them are trying to make a difference in their community. A lot of them are, trying to make a living for their family, especially those who grew up in a low income area. And I think that's the parallel you can draw with any country that has that opportunity. So it really, really starts with education, and just having an opportunity to have peace so you can allocate that time and resources to those type of things. So there's going to be an opportunity there. I personally, if you're asking me that question, it's going to be tough in this, in this generation for Afghan people, just because the Taliban, based on their influence and what they know, how they will influence the country, that's what makes it tough. Is because you have a force, and it's different than having a president or even a king for that matter. But what makes it tough is when people pass on their ideologies and their beliefs, particularly ones that are not exactly, made for people to prosper. That's what causes that issue. So, as long as there's an opportunity, and for me, I think if there's a new people in power that at least are open to that idea, and really care, then there's going to be a chance. Like I said, countries have done it before, and you can almost, somewhat copy some of that playbook. And it's going to require the older generation to be, recognize it and be willing to help the young generation, because, they're not going to enjoy as much, but they're going to dedicate all their time and resources to their children or to the younger generation, because then they have that ability when they grow old to make those decisions. So it's a lot of sacrifice that's going to be required once you get to that age, but it's definitely possible. I mean, it's not impossible.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, I think I would agree. Peace is an important precondition, but then I think another element I would say is information accessibility, and I think that I mean what you see in a lot of the authoritarian regimes, not just the Islamist ones, like the ones in Afghanistan or Iran, but even the kind of like secular ones like North Korea or Cuba, for instance, where I think there is, a lot of effort by those regimes to try to reduce the information access of the general population, and that has the impact of basically keeping those populations away from, you could say, like, what is the alternative? I mean, as you call it, like, finding purpose, finding meaning in life through education, through learning ideas and things like that. And that's certainly, one of the main
Mm.
obstacles. But then I don't know. Do you think that, like, internet and, you know um like, basically, like, the lower cost of the communication, I mean, like, is it possible to, you know break through some of those informational barriers um in the population?
Do you mean about like in terms of accessibility? Um,
Yeah, I mean, so I guess the idea is, like, if I'm able, I mean, this is very idealistic now, but, like, if I was able to access, like, broader information about, yeah, like, education, about, how do you improve, I don't know, agricultural techniques, and
I
how
see.
do I have, like, a more democratic form of government instead
I
of the
see. I see
authoritarian
what you're
one, and
saying.
so on. Like, I mean, and our, new technologies, that break the information barrier. I mean, like, is that going to be able to, through the process of osmosis, change societies gradually and empower them? Yeah.
I think this is a great question. Little bit outside the box here, but um, here's what I think. I think you know it's almost like this quote that was I don't know exactly who said it, but somebody said like if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Um, we've seen society, and some people might argue we haven't even progressed as much as we would like to, but we've seen society in a very traditional setting be successful, where they don't necessarily require whether right now it'd be AI, for example, right? It doesn't always require those type of things. What people really need and what we've seen that works because what we think what works versus what actually has worked are two different things. For example, we haven't seen the effects of AI on someone's life for a very long time span. It simply isn't hasn't been tested and it hasn't been, to my knowledge, available for even that long period of time yet. So we really don't know what those effects are going to be, and sometimes that can be a dangerous thing. But in terms of what has actually worked, we know that structure simply matters. It's very, very rare for a child, again, just keeping apples to apples here, a child who's grown really anywhere in the world, it's very rare to see a child or a young kid, regardless of whatever age you want, you could even go young adult for that matter, be able to on their own make a very decisive plan and decision of where they want to go and end up in life and how that will impact them. Very, very, very few people have that natural desire, intellect, and ability based on their experience. So that's why we have a school system for that matter, is because there are quite a few people throughout our history that we've seen, hey, maybe they didn't go to a traditional school, they were successful. But generally, for an overwhelming amount of people, they go through that natural progression in society and life. So I think there are moments where maybe some new technologies can be very useful and resourceful. Um, but long time ago, we just had a notebook and we just had a whiteboard. We didn't even have a computer. We didn't have these things because we had access to books. And a computer is supposed to make our life easier, but that requires the person who's using that resource to have that understanding, to have sort of a structure that they can identify for themselves. So what I'm trying to say, and then I know it kind of sounds like I'm dancing around the question here, is that structure is really, really important, and that it almost doesn't matter what technology is being used if the person using it doesn't know how to use that resource. So, can it help? Of course, anything can help, but it just comes down to if the person using it doesn't know what to do. I mean, it's going to be very, very hard to go very far. I mean, it's almost like one of my favorite moments in the movie of Alice in the Wonderland, where you know Alice talks to the black cat, who's this magic just kind of appears, and then Alice just says, "I just want to go somewhere really nice," and then the black cat just disappears in thin air and says, "It doesn't matter where you go then," because it's the truth. It really doesn't matter where you go if you don't know where you want to go. So all these tools are great. All these tools sound amazing, but at the end of the day, the person using the tool has to have that plan and factor. And I think that's where it starts. So it can help. Yes, internet helps and all this helps. But how good is the internet if someone uses it spending all that time just watching funny videos or just watching irrelevant things that are not going to be part of their education long term? So it's a good question you asked me, because that would be my counter argument, or more so my counterpoint to people who are all for these new technologies and new systems, especially to test in other countries. Um, it's going to come back to just like the old school times. It just matters who uses it.
Yeah, yeah, that's for sure. That's a very important observation here, and we all have to hope that as time evolves, that people become, you could say, more informed, less ignorant, and they're able to, in thereby, I mean, the political implication, of course, that we're interested in is kind of like having accountable government, right? Like holding the
Right.
people in power to account. Because I don't know whether you followed the story in South Korea, but they had this, military. Um, it was not a, well, it was
Was it
sort of a
martial
coup,
law?
right?
They
Yeah, it was a
tried to.
martial law. That's right.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was a martial law. But then, the parliament then voted to revoke the martial law that the president had imposed, because the president, he was facing, I think, impeachment proceedings. Like his wife, I think, was accused of some corrupt business. And the opposition, controlled parliament, and so he basically tried to shut down the parliament through the martial law. And then the army kind of then went to the parliament to basically enforce the presidential decree. But then
Mm.
the parliamentarians, they were able then to gather, and they voted to repeal the martial law, and then the soldiers left the building. And there were a lot of protests too. So a lot of the like popular supporters of the opposition parties, they went on the public square, and they basically chant for the president to step down. Um, and the latest message that I've seen is that the army command is now saying that they obey the president, which means that probably the decree might be enforced. So it's still in flux. I mean, but it seems to me to be like, because you mentioned the South Korean example. I mean, it seems to me to be an instantiation where I think that civil society in the Korean society um, is so strong and so developed. Now, I mean, I'm only saying this just as an outside observer, not as an expert in Korean society. But from what I understand, that um, like like the civil society, the educational levels high enough, right,
Hmm.
in order to push back against, you could say, power grab, by the ruling elites, more or less. And that might actually be, you know, I don't know, it's like a positive interpretation of the events that are transpiring. Now, obviously, I mean, if you were like a Korean right now, you might say, well, what's happening today is terrible. That we had to get to this point. Could we have gone there, in the United States through, a couple of years ago, January 6th, right? Um, so there is, I don't know, but with the framework that we've been using today, I mean, do you agree with that kind of, I don't know, positive framing, I suppose, about, um, basically the strength of civil society, more or less, to control the political system. Um,
I mean, uh, checks and balances, right? I mean, we know in a modern society that most countries that are operating, you can call it first world, you can call it Western society, or whatever have you, is that we just simply have checks and balances because we don't want one person to be potentially sporadic and make a decision that could be consequential to many people in that nation. So it's something that helps countries be more careful in their decision. In their decision, also, do something that may not be so as abrupt. I mean, even countries that some people might not even see as particularly following Western ideology, whether they could, follow even part a belief in communism or whatever you think. There's even checks and balances in those type of governments. It doesn't always seem like it, but stuff like this, like as you said, I think you sometimes, especially in the political landscape where there's smoke, there's fire. As you said, the president's particular wife, be doing maybe unethical things and business deals, and then the president on his own declaring it to potentially save himself, and then you have a government step in and be like, you can't just do that, and then right on cue, he might try to save face and just be like, well, actually, I'm taking it back. So I think checks and balances are really important, especially in moments like this, because it's almost crazy to think about, but like a president, could declare something like martial law, and have that unrest, and if there wasn't that system present there to kind of hold someone accountable, then there's like a rabbit hole it can go under. So it's definitely something I think as a modern society we're much more mindful of now, and I think you see there's like great things about it, because then things won't be as serious and won't be as abrupt, because you don't always want to make a very drastic decision, but in this case, as you can see, it's good that it's there, so it works out.
So I think the important thing about like rule of law is that yeah, the rulers are held accountable. And I mean, but within the U.S., I mean, it's quite difficult. I mean, for one political side to now assert it, right? Because you saw, the pardoning of like Hunter Biden, right, the son of the outgoing president, right, where he put the the pardoning date, right? So he did not specify in the pardon the crimes, the alleged crimes.
Mm,
He only specified the date, right? Which is, I think, January of 2014. So right before that appointment to the Ukrainian energy company, right? Where so I guess like the president's argument is basically that that there's a witch hunt that is targeting his son, right? Um, and and it's quite interesting because the Democrats were the ones who were always saying, well, look at the corruption within the Trump empire,
right.
and we have to follow up on those things, and um, and now I mean. Well, when the Democratic representative, is now facing, the very same kinds of um, allegations. And like, I mean, and so I'm not saying that like, like if Trump gets in, that it's going to be much better, right? I mean, in fact, I mean, I think there's going to be a much bigger threat of corruption because, not only do you have like his own family and in-laws that he will appoint to government offices, but also like, Elon Musk, right? I mean, he was kind of like the main benefactor billionaire, right? Sitting behind him, controlling, huge amounts of like government contracting, right, through his companies. And now he has even more influence over it by being an insider in the government now. So I guess my question to you is like, do you think that like that like this like checks and balances that we sort of idealize as a general public, is that like does it stand on firm grounds? As we hope it to be.
I think that's a good question. I think what people have to realize is that even though I think that system does work, we have to be mindful that there are ranks, just like in every sort of government, where you would expect even someone who is, whether to be president, a king, a prime minister, for them to be having a little bit more uh, power to make an influence and a decision in a, whether it be a governmental structure. In some cases, it could be an economic decision. Um, they're going to have that ability to have that influence. Now, in the United States, and that's why I say we're definitely not perfect. There's definitely holes you can see even in a government that someone might presume to be, for the people, by the people, and um, have that freedom of expression that one would be hopeful for. Is that, and I think in the Biden case is that, as a president, you are able to pardon people. You are able to, um, get someone out just like that, and who someone could have done a very bad crime, or someone who could be on the fence, or you could pardon your friend. I mean, it's like it's one of those things where it's a tough question and it's an ethical question, but the president has that ability. I think in Biden's case, I believe he was saying that he was not going to pardon his son. I think Biden was maybe confident or hopeful that if Kamala was in power, that she would do it. And I think what happened here is that when she ended up not winning, um, I'm sure the people around him were just maybe telling him that it's really not that big of a deal, that maybe he should just do it. And then I think in the end that he just did it because it's his son. And one thing I ask people to be mindful of, because sometimes people focus too much on um, a party, and sometimes you just have to look at an individual person and see their history. Like I said, when there's smoke, there's fire. So whether you not be a fan of Trump, or whether you not be a fan of Biden, or even Kamala for that matter, is that sometimes they have big baggage, and sometimes they're going to do things that are maybe better for them and not so much for you, because they have that power. Now, they can't just pretty much declare a state where they can do whatever they want, go all willy nilly and go crazy, because at that point, they can get thrown out, because we have that ability. But it's not really ethical. But that just comes with the position of being in power. So just be mindful when that happens. Like I said, he said he wasn't going to do it, then he ended up doing it, and some people are not going to be happy about it, but that just kind of comes with the position. If you're asking me personally what I think about it, I think, you know, I mean, how many people are you going to know that are in this position that are not going to pardon their son, right? I I think sometimes you have to go that question, but at the same time, you can still say that what he did was unethical, and you could still say that what he did was questionable, especially when he said himself he wouldn't do it. So I think there's other factors that play into every decision. I think he was just hopeful that someone else would do it, but because his own candidate lost, I think this was really his only shot, and then he just did it before he could leave. So even in our society, there's going to be things that are just simply not fair to everybody, and it just comes with that position of being in power. So it's not like we're going to change a president's ability tomorrow just because of a few decisions, but it is something to definitely be mindful of. And this is why it's not always going to be perfect.
Yeah, I mean, so and like you could say like the political hypocrisy that we find in the Democratic Party. I mean, certainly, I mean, within the Republican side, I mean, you will find that too, right? Because the Republican position oftentimes with things like gay marriage, right, is very very restrictive, right, on the social issues. You know, but then some of these politicians they get caught with having had like a gay affair, right, and things like that. I think there's definitely the holier than thou issue in political posturing. But it's not. I don't think it's exclusive to a single political party, right? I think it's more that like okay, I have the opportunity to do things that are very selfish while I'm in power, um, and um, and I'll just do it, and hopefully I'll get away with it. And then, but I think it's also I think today it's much tougher to get away with things because I think it goes back to technology point again. So if you have instantaneous communication, right? Um, like where I don't have to wait for the regular news cycle, wait for the New York Times to report it the next day, but rather like information that kind of uh, cuts right through on the social media channels. I think that um, like if the speed of information is quicker, I do believe that it there is an additional lever for accountability of political leaders that did not exist before. And that's why I mean a lot of governments are very interested in controlling the flow of political information. Um, there's a lot of efforts that including what the U.S. government is doing to control the free flow of information. Um, and 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 I think and what's the only counterbalance to the power abuse by officials? I think it would be the civil society. I mean, it goes back to the point, to your point about do we have enough of the educated people who are crying foul and who are demanding the accountability of the officials? And so, but from Biden's pragmatic perspective, I mean, like, yeah, he doesn't have to worry about it, anything. I mean, even reputation wise, because he's going to stand down next month, right? So it's really, uh, it's just like the one last minute thing I can push through, and then hopefully people will remember me in the history books for the other great things that I did in the presidency. Um, and yeah, yeah, but yeah, it's a very fraught, you know, uh, a political lesson, for sure. Um, yeah, okay, so let's shift the gears a little bit. So we originally said that we were going to talk about um the health related issues because I think we both seem to have developed a very strong passion about it. So maybe let's start with kind of like so what is kind of the optimal health regime you could say that you would pursue, right? So stretching, it could be diet, exercise related, or yeah, daily practices, mindfulness, all of these things. So what's your understanding of that?
Yeah, yeah, sure. And I think this is totally okay. I don't mind at all. But if changing gears, I'm happy to talk about any topic. And you're right. We did originally plan to talk about health, but I think it happens. It's kind of like when you go to when you see a friend again, or you go to a barber shop, or you go anywhere and topics come up.
That's right.
Um, but in the regards of health, almost kind of like politics, it can get very complicated very quickly because everybody has their point of view. Everybody has some study that they want to link, or everybody has their personal experience that they've gone through and they think that works. And then sometimes you have science, and science tells us one thing, but then sometimes you question the science because not every study is unique. Some studies could be as little as a week or 4 weeks and 16 weeks, and you got studies for up to 5 years and 10 years. And there's just so much information out there, particularly with health, that it can get really confusing. Um, so I think the biggest thing is, especially somebody who's trying to be really healthy. I think let's get to the base. Let's not start when we're starting talking about you know this conversation about health. Let's not focus on particular things. Let's talk about just the actual uh, idea of being healthy. And I think to be healthy, it means you have a good amount of energy, um, that you're able to go among your day and do all of your daily tasks, that you're not necessarily fatigued. You're able to uphold conversations. You're able to go to bed at a good time. You're able to age very gracefully. You're able to just do a lot of different things. Not particularly, doesn't have to be excellent, but just well enough where there's not a concern. And I think for our parents and our grandparents before, in a lot of the cases, we've seen actual, whether it be videos or we actually had books written about it of how they used to live their lives in high school and things like that. And I think for someone to be really healthy, they have to kind of answer those questions: is am I sleeping well? Can I sleep well? Do I feel like I'm full of energy all the time? Can I do my exercise routine? Can I be social? Can I uphold, be able to uphold a nice deep conversation? Um, can I, when I look at something, I don't necessarily get a need to be tired. Want to make sure all parts of your body, whether it not be your physical health but your mental health, um, all be intact. And I think, to keep it simple, because I'm just talking about the generality of it, it all starts with two really main things. It starts with how well you're sleeping and how well you're eating. And eating is a huge part, because when you wake up every day, a lot of people aren't mindful of the quality of the ingredients that they always of the foods they eat. So, for example, different types of meat and different types of eggs. We know that they're great of eggs. We know that some of them are grown a certain type of way, and likely an organic, pasture raised eggs, which means that the chickens are living lives without without any hormones. They're able to live kind of like us, just freely. We're not kept in a cage and things like that. It's like sometimes you have to draw that parallel. They're able to produce higher quality eggs because they're happier, because they're more joyous, they're able to live longer. That impacts the chicken. So when the chicken or the animal is having a good life, and in turn they're going to produce, whether it be higher quality meat and higher quality proteins. And that's something we can take. For example, I know for me, I can eat a lot of eggs from a very healthy, good source, versus if I just eat your regular, very cheap store bought eggs, I would be very, I could have a stomach ache, or I could potentially not absorb all of the proteins, and not eat nearly as many eggs. And I found that to be a big difference because I don't feel as bloated. You won't feel as gassy necessarily, and you're able to eat more, and in turn, your body can absorb more. So make sure that whatever you get, it starts with the quality. Um, just like animals, just like humans, if you don't exercise, it's going to be tough for you to live very long, or tough for you to have good quality days. If you don't sleep well, the same idea. You eat high quality foods, and in turn you get that energy, and you get that end result of being able to age well, your body having the correct metabolic rate, You're able to burn a healthy amount of calories versus not being able to, and digestion and being able to digest all of that food in a very healthy rate, so you don't gain too much weight, but at the same time you're not too skinny. So it's all about not doing too much but not doing too little. um, I know I kind of talked like a wide range there. I'm happy to go into specifics, but I think ultimately people really really need to focus on quality, particularly quality sleep, quality eat, and then if I could add a bonus category, quality exercise.
Yeah. So what would be the so for each of these categories, like what is like the precise regiment? Because I mean, for instance, like with sleep, there's important discussion about like what should be the right routines when you go to bed, like what helps you fall asleep and stay asleep for the full whatever 7 8 hours. Like for the diet, I mean, you could say, okay, quality ingredients is important, but like what are actually the good foods and the bad foods, right? The good foods
Mm.
really the ones that nourish me and give me the energy, as you say. And then the bad foods, basically making me fat and sluggish. And then for the exercise, it's like, well, like of course you have the cardio, you have the weightlifting, weight bearing, right? So there's a certain balance between those two, and different sports that you can kind of pursue, different practices. So yeah, maybe just delve into each of these three arenas, and talk a little bit about, like, yeah, some more details there.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think, um, the first thing is I know it can get very complex because these three main categories make up a large bulk of it. I would argue the first two definitely make up the bulk of it. But there's going to be just like you have accessories, right? It's going to be things that will help it, but you have to make sure that the bulk of it is taken care of. I mean, to answer your first question, I think the human body and the human mind is very, very smart, whether people want to believe it or not. And your body works insanely hard. It does so many things just to keep you alive and just to keep you being able to, have an effective day. And you might not even realize the amount of stress or the amount of energy that it can produce. So, one of the things is you just have to trust it sometimes. When your body tells you that something is good, usually it's a good sign. When your body's telling you something is not working out well, usually that's a sign to be more cautious and pay attention to. Um, and I think the first thing to kind of do is to sleep is an easy one because I think that's one where most people can really identify whether they're sleeping well or not. It's not one of those things where you can trick yourself like you did sleep well, but you're just gonna fall asleep during the day. Because your body, it has that clock, that internal clock, and it knows that if you keep going all day, eventually you're gonna crash, and it's very very hard to escape that reality. So I think the first thing is to have a productive sleep, is to make sure um, you're being very mindful of things that might alarm that sleep. So most people can really, really are really able to have nice, good, deep sleep. And sometimes you might have to build up to it if you've been sleeping for a short period of time. But we can get there. We can get to at least a 7 8 hour day. Okay, we can get there. I think um, to some extent, almost regardless of everybody. They somebody we should all generally be able to get there. And what we know is that when our ancestors before us, they necessarily didn't have technology, and they didn't have to worry about this type of light or this type of wavelength. But for us, we have to be mindful of those things. So your body, when it's doing activities like digesting, um, and not focusing on rest, is going to disturb its sleep. So that's why we should be mindful. And sometimes it can, if it sounds like common sense, sometimes it really is that simple. So before we go to bed, we want to make sure that, we're relatively going in a restful state without eating too much food. So give like a rough estimate of an amount could be like to 2 hours. So 2 hours we have our last meal, and now our body is digesting that food over a period of 2 hours, um, and then at that point, okay, your body can focus more on being restless than digesting. Okay, so there's an easy one right there. Then I think it comes to a factor that, again, our ancestors and parents may didn't have to worry about as much, but blue light. But studies have shown us, and blue light, we actually have, I made a case earlier in the conversation that sometimes we have to be careful with data because we haven't experienced things for a lifetime to know. I would argue at this point, even though it's still on the early side, we do have a lot of data on blue light because there's people who live throughout almost their whole life using blue light. And what we know is that it activates our ability to be alert. And when you see blue light, that's almost like a sort of a way like this. Think of the sun rising, is that it's time to be more alert. So I don't want to say tricking your brain, um, but maybe I could use that in this case. But you're almost getting your brain to think you're awake when you're constantly on your phone, especially during times of nighttime. So you just like how it takes a while for morning to go into night. It doesn't happen overnight, right? Like the sun rises and the sun sets. Same thing with the phone. We want to have a nice, healthy period of time. It's going to differ per person, and you can build tolerance to it as well. But that we don't use things that can potentially signal our body to be awake. So now we're truly in a restless state when we stay away from using a lot of, uh, you know, using things that could potentially get that body to be alert, such like using blue light and digesting. And then putting your body in a restless state would accompany maybe like listening to music that's very soft and mellow to kind of get your brain moving in a harmony, having a healthy nighttime routine where maybe it could be um, practicing mindfulness and meditating, or whether it be something as simple as like having a nighttime skincare routine that it's able to relax you. So we want to be in that state of being relaxed. And so for some people, believe it or not, even reading a book could be that sense of relaxation. And if it is that, and eventually, because even when you read a book, eventually you get to a point where your mind might get a little bit tired, then it will start practice. Then it will start practicing being in a restless state, um, just because of that period of time when you're reading, it's developing it. So when you do that, then all of a sudden you can really have nice and deep sleep because you're truly in a restless state. It's like different elements that all come together to produce a good result. If if you have one part of practicing restlessness, which is maybe not eating, but you're using blue light and you don't have like a real nighttime routine, well, it'll be incomplete, right? Because you're not getting all of those markers indicated. So then you'll probably have less deep sleep and probably be able sleeping less. But when everything comes together, think of this as a parallel in life. When everything comes well together, when everything's working in harmony, usually the results are better. So that's somebody who really wants to maximize those things. Then I think second, we move to diet. And I think this one is also very, very important because this is one that we really have to be careful of, especially if you live in a Western society, as big as the U.S. because there's still a lot of food out there that's considered toxic. There's still a lot of food out there that's considered very unhealthy, and a lot of people snack, especially here more than any other country, that they're not very mindful of that. And what happens is we need vitamins every day to function, to make our body up and running so we can be healthy and avoid things like getting us sick or developing cancer cells. And I can go on and on and on. It really starts with the diet because that gets the body to really work. That gets, um, that builds that harmony we're looking for to have that productive day. So if we're starting off and we're doing things like we're not eating, or we're eating the lowest quality foods, and then we're eating things that can really cause inflammation, which will almost always be lower quality foods, then your body doesn't work correctly. And then that harmony is going to be in that center is going to be off. And then when that center's off, then it causes other things to fall as a result. So then you'll have a less productive workout, or you have a less productive study session, or you have a less productive, thinking session. I mean, or less, even the less productive, in a social setting, you won't be as social as you normally would. So that's the power that food does, is that it keeps everything sort of under alignment. And the reason why I said quality is because unfortunately there's a lot of things that people don't read in the back that are not always the most digestible. And that can cause inflammation, it can signal toxicity in the body, and all of those things are like, I mean, you could think of it as like, if it helps, like you have a weightlifting session, you have an injury, or you have swelling in your body. Like it gets really hard to have a good workout when your body's in pain, right? Because it's easy to measure that. It's sort of the similar idea. When your body internally is having that sort of negative reaction, and it won't be able to be at its highest, and it won't be able to get that longevity. So what happens is, after a period of time, just like sports, right? You have a shorter career. All of a sudden, you're not going to be as active as much. All of a sudden, you're not going to be able to be as alert, and it'll show on your face. It'll show on your body. It'll show the years you've aged versus someone who's done and taken care of those things at a very, very high level. So you don't really see it as much people who are early on up to their, mid to late 20s, but you really, really, really see it once you get um, in the mid 30s and passed on from there. The people who really took care of themselves for all those years, they will almost look very similar to they did like 10, 15 years ago. And the people who didn't, they'll look like they aged 10, 20, 30 years. And your body will just eventually show what you did internally. And I think that's just something that people who, if you don't have that routine going, you just have to be very, very mindful of. Stop the snacking. Be careful of foods that can cause inflammation. Stay away particularly from oils that can cause inflammation, especially low quality oils coming from vegetables. Um, and stay away from foods that are maybe at least lower quality or very cheaply made. And then you at least can get something going where you're able to have those positive results. So I'm gonna be honest, a lot of it is more so what not to do than what to do, because when you take away the negative, sometimes you know you add by subtracting. So then all of a sudden, you're working really well. So I mean, very rarely do I go a day and I eat something that is not from a whole food source. I mean, very rarely. I mean, it almost doesn't happen. Um, that's something that's an easy thing to do. Is the If you can control yourself from those snacking urges, honestly, don't even buy them. Like, don't even if it's on sale, and even if it's on whatever. Because I know it used to be that way too. If you just ignore them, all of a sudden you won't crave them as much. Make it hard for you to crave those type of items. If you do have them, lock them up, or ask your loved one, or excuse me, or your friend, or your parent, whoever it is you're with, just lock it up for you so you don't see it. In this way, you can actually trick the mind, because when you don't see something, it's hard for you to think about eating or grasping it. And you'd be surprised how effective stuff like this is, because it's all about how your mind is driving itself. And then all of a sudden, when you're very healthy and you start eating whole foods and higher quality foods and locally grown foods, all of a sudden, you're not going to want to crave these things. It's a very crazy thing that happens. It does take time, and the time differs from each person depending on how many years and for how long you've been eating a certain way. But all of a sudden, when you get to a point, like, because it has happened for me, and certainly for my brother and my mom as well, you're like, wow, this really isn't as good as I imagined. Like, you're like, wow, potato chips with canola oil. Like, I used to like this. It's really hard to believe. It's honest truth. It's really hard to believe, because when you eat it, even you eat like five chips, something just feels off about the chips. It just feels like it feels cheaply made, and your body doesn't accept it as well. And I think that's a very good sign, because it means your immune system and your digestion is working well, because it's working so well, it's literally telling you this is not food, or this is very low quality food, versus somebody who's grown up in a certain lifestyle where they maybe ate that type of way for a long period of time, is just it might taste like a regular food to them. And that's when it becomes dangerous. It becomes dangerous when your body doesn't have that alertness it used to have, and it can't tell you the big difference between low quality food and sometimes good quality food, because that's something to be mindful of. You should definitely be getting sick when you eat something very bad. Otherwise, if you're not getting sick from eating foods that might potentially be bad, I mean, your immune system just is not working like the way it should, because that's a natural response. When we're children and when we're babies, we get sick off of everything. And I'm not saying to have that level of immune system, but why are children and babies getting sick? They're super fresh, and the moment they have a pathogen, the moment they identify a carcinogen, the moment they identify a, a toxic ingredient, their body's like, I am going to defend it at all cost. And that's why they get so sick, is because of the huge reaction to that whatever you ate. So as people, I'm not saying you need to have that type of reaction, but when you have a little bit of reaction to things like that, don't always think of it as being negative, because that means your body is really working hard for it. And I think that's something that we should be more mindful of, is that youth is something that we have to work on. We can't just get at the end of the age. I know that was a really long response on it, but I'm trying to be very specific about how you can approach it and how you want to eat and your body's ultimate response to it. So,
Yeah, so the important thing, the distinction between good food and bad food is that good food is the whole foods. So that is to say that it is an unprocessed ingredient. That is to say, basically, I mean, so I mean, you have two types of foods that are natural, right? So either
mm-hmm,
plant food, right? So it either grows in the ground,
mm-hmm,
or it is animal food, right? So basically,
mm-hmm,
it had legs and was walking around. And I think whether it's the plant or the animal base, which I know there's this big carnivore versus vegan debate, which I've followed that one very closely, obviously, since the health journey. Um, but I think but they do converge on this point of as long as it's a whole food, right? It's not been ultra processed. So certainly, I mean, when you mention the like the chips cooked in vegetable oils, in the vegetable oil, I think that label is a little bit misleading, right? I think seed oil is probably maybe a more accurate label.
mm-hmm,
So basically because you take, let's say, the corn or the soybean, um, and then through some long-winded chemical process, you press out the liquid. And then that liquid itself is very rancid. So then you have to process it in the factory, right? So you have
mm,
hydrogenation, you have bleaching, you have the heating up. And after all of these, like I think 6, 7 chemical steps, at the end of it, you then have, this liquid they put in a bottle. And and then the mainstream dietary community, right? Um, you know, they are kind of promoting the so-called, polyunsaturated fats that come from those seed oils. And they're saying, well, you should be consuming more of those seed oils. And then I think then, well, that's why I think this, health issue, which I think I think I agree with you that it is a universal human desire. I think people want to be healthy if they, knew how to be healthy. But it is a very political um, minefield, so to speak, because I think that there is a mainstream diet community. I think that does not give completely the right advice to the population, and I think that this is also a factor for why people's health on average is declining, right? So if you look at the latest thing is about the pharmaceutical drugs. I mean, are you familiar with GLP-1, right?
Hmm.
Ozempic, Mounjaro, um, and various kinds of medications that basically you know they change the hormonal balance in your body to basically give you more of the satiety signals by eating less. But it has quite heavy side effects, right? So you have people that are getting nauseous, or they're not just losing fat, they're losing a lot of muscle mass, right? Because they eat too little in general, right? And of course that's problematic because we know a lot of older people that don't have enough muscle, they fall down easily and break their hips and stuff. So so there's this issue of health politics, I would say, where it's very difficult to communicate to the public, the good um, health advice, because you have to go against the mainstream. You have to go against the mainstream advice that is given by some of the health authorities. And that's what makes it somewhat complex of an issue to deal with. Um, but yeah, so yeah, so but anyway, yeah, so yeah, so Whole Foods, yeah, it is the right um approach to take. Um, and also, like you mentioned, like the snacking aspect. I think certainly that's important as well. I mean, I used to be a prolific snacker, and then I cut that out, and then because oftentimes, I mean, it wasn't so much the hunger that drives you to those snacks. Rather, you walk in the grocery store aisle, and you're like, oh, you see something. It's got like this flashy packaging, right?
Hmm.
And you just imagine, whatever the crunch of the chips in your mouth and stuff. And and then the thing is that, well, how is it possible that so you open up the packets, and then you finish the whole packet, right? It's like it could be how much, 300 grams or something, right? Um, and how is it possible that those kinds of foods go down so easily, right? Um, and it seems like so that like well, so the nutrient content seems to be the big thing, right? So if you have foods that have very low nutrient content, I think that you know your your hormones are not going to tell you that you should stop eating, right? And then, like you mentioned, like the whole foods, like especially the animal foods, like the eggs and the meat and stuff. I mean, if you eat those, I would say there will come a point very quickly. I would say, like let's say eating a whole steak and then maybe two eggs or something, where you're like, okay, I'm kind of full. I should stop eating, right?
Hmm.
And then I think that with the ultra processed food, it doesn't give you that fullness signal, and I
Hmm.
think that is a major problem. And then to go back to the Monjaro thing, where if now you're taking these hormone laden drugs. Um, it, Now, if you still eat the ultra processed junk, I think I think you're kind of at a double disadvantage, right? Because you eat the low quality nutrition, because your hormones are altered, so you have the satiety signals now. So actually, your state of malnourishment is just gonna exacerbate in that way, even though you might, lose some pounds along the way. So I don't know. So do you have a take on like the health politics side of things, or do you want to stray from
Yeah,
that?
absolutely. I think there is a political aspect to almost everything in life, because everyone wants to take a position they feel very strongly about, and even if the science says one thing, some people go by personal experience, and I do think that there's a little bit of an art to the science because everybody is a bit different, but I do think there's some things that are very clear and obvious. Um, for example, we know things that are whole foods are very good for us. It's natural. We're able to digest it. We've done it for set. Don't even give me like 5, 10 years. We've done it for forever. We've done it since we practically humans existed. Um, but I think where the issue becomes is that you'll have people in positions of government, and you'll have people with an agenda who might have been influenced, arguing that things are really not that bad. Well, let's think about it. Um, it's so hard to produce an oil. In this case, you can call it seed oils as well because really they're all not that good. But it's so extremely difficult to produce an oil from just one piece of vegetable. But vegetables are so cheap and so abundant, we take such a large portion of them, and we sort of get that content of oil from something like vegetables. But think about the idea of a vegetable. A vegetable, what we know, also has defense chemicals, and the idea is if you don't eat too many vegetables, like eating few, you'll be relatively fine. But let's think about that idea again. If we're eating a lot of vegetables in the amount that are being pressed, especially at the high heats, that's not even including potentially lead or copper or anything even leaching onto the food that would have to be pressed to get something, knowing it has such a high amount of defense chemicals, knowing it's cheaply made, um, because we make an abundance of corn, for example, in the U.S. We literally make so much we have to burn it. Um, think to yourself, does that really sound like something you would want to put in your stomach? Just the idea, not even the taste, just on the idea for a second. And then when we go to the taste, and we know that something is just relatively off with the taste. If you use something that is relatively from a more nutritious source, that is more accepting to be eaten, like a fruit, you could have something like olive oil, and even some cases avocado oil, where it would produce a better response to the body and it would be higher in saturated fat. And another thing, we know saturated fats, because it used to be vilified. Now we know saturated fats are good because it can be used as a source of energy. And that, I'm not trying to say that on the reverse scale, something like canola oil, polyunsaturated fat is necessarily going to be bad. But the problem is the amount is so high in polyunsaturated fat, and we know it causes inflammation, that's where issues start to occur. And then you have people who are part of the carnivore, and then the tallow, or even butter, where again higher in the saturated fat, a little bit of polyunsaturated fat, and it's very easy to use and cook. It's higher quality. You taste it right away, and it feels good. And by the way, it has vitamins in it. So that gives you at least a little bit more into depth of how a cooking oil can alter the taste. Because remember, not too long ago, when McDonald's was even around, they were using tallow for their fries. they would cook, to my understanding, even their burgers in a tallow blend of some sort. So, and you saw the ads of people in McDonald's from even the 50s and 40s, and you saw pictures of people. They weren't necessarily heavy. I mean, McDonald's even back then wasn't even known for being, you know, having too many obese people, even people who would eat there every day. They didn't even get as bad as of a as a negative health benefit of result than people in this society do who eat every day. I mean, you can go 2 months straight to McDonald's versus 2 years back then, and the 2 years you would turn out almost fine, and then people nowadays they go 2 months and then now you're getting something like you're getting a disease, you're getting a sickness, or you're getting a really bad result from it. I mean, sometimes you have to wake up and ask yourself, why is my stomach always hurting? Because I hear a lot of the youth talking about this. And I hear a lot of people who go to college because they have access to foods like this all the time. Ask yourself that question. If you really are eating this food and you're like, why is my stomach hurting? Why can't I focus? Why do I have no energy when I study? It really starts from identifying those key things. And unfortunately, we have people in power and the money that's being produced from fast food restaurants, they're going to keep producing ads. They're going to keep paying celebrities. They're potentially going to keep lobbying people in Congress. They're not out there necessarily to say it's healthy. And the crazy thing is that they still do this knowing how destructive it could be to society. And there's a reason why we're considered the obese nation in the country. And out of all the countries, is because we keep feeding people these type of foods because it's cheap and easy. And when it's cheap and easy, you can make more money. Because guess what? Natural food is more expensive. We're not shocked by that. But if you're gonna pay $12, $13 for a low quality burger, you know, if you could just get something probably around the same price and make it yourself at home, that probably would be better. I know it's convenient, but really ask yourself, what is the sacrifice? And, McDonald's isn't going anywhere soon. So, unless our actual lawmakers, and I know Robert F. Kennedy is big on this, are going to actually do something to remove or basically make companies feel some pressure to remove things that they know are openly unhealthy. Because guess what? We have water in this country that produced from different bottles, and we have a level of test that for each content, it could be lead, could be arsenic, could be you name it. And it's a huge list. And a lot of the water we even drink in this country, a lot of them are well over the US legal limit. And you would be shocked how very little is done by something like that. I really don't know what the reason is. Maybe because it's clearly over the legal limit, it's clearly bad, but there's just nothing being done about it. And then you, as a person, you have to take your initiative to be your own legal guardian in that sense, where you literally have to take care of yourself and be like, I can't eat this, I can't eat that, I can't drink this. It requires research and time. I get it, but be open about it. But just general things that make sense. For example, we know plastic is not good. Okay, try to drink out of glass bottles. That's an easy one, right? We know that food is better made from whole food sources. Try to stick with whole food sources. We know food is better from happy, healthy animals and grown in the right setting. Try to get food from those type of resources. We know snacking is bad. Try to remove that from your life. I think there's some things that are very, very intuitive when you really think about it, and they will end up making a difference in your life. That's what we have to pay attention to. I wouldn't sit here, even with Robert F. Kennedy, who's kind of having more control of the, HHS and just having more control over our health in general. I wouldn't expect anyone to come in to make a big difference of it because just the volume of people we have in this country. We're not France, right? We're not Switzerland. We're not gonna have like that that low enough amount of people where and enough and low enough amount of players where we can make that type of easily impact the whole country with it. There's just too many people in the US. So that's what makes it difficult sometimes is that the volume of food has to match the people. So that's why everything's also been made so cheap. Is because we can instantly make fast food unfortunately, we can't instantly make natural organic meat products. So that's one of the reasons why. But that's not to say that that's good. It's just to say you have to take that own initiative because most people are not going to. Even if I'm against that idea, it has to be doable. So you have to take that initiative. Don't hope for Congress. Don't hope for laws. I mean, I'm telling you, things are literally being made and they're failing every single test you could think of under the sun, and they're still being released to the public. So you tell me if that's not alarming to you.
Yeah, and then also like, why is it that, corn, soybean, wheat, why are they so cheap? Because I mean, also if you look at like the USDA website, I mean, they'll show you, the most subsidized agricultural products in this country are those very three ingredients. And I was and I understand so like the history of the US agricultural policy, right? Where back then in the, early 20th century, they were saying, well, we want to prevent, starvation, right? We want to generate enough food surplus, right? So we can store it during the bad economic times. And it's true that corn and soy, can be stored for a long time. But there is a negative, uh, you know, uh, consequence of subsidizing those very food products, right? Because because then if you produce too much of it, then okay, we're gonna be converting them into the seed oils, and the seed oils we feed that to the population. And originally, the original use of the seed oils was the cottonseed oil, which they used to lubricate engines,
Mm.
right? I mean, it was not even designed for human consumption, and then they turned it into something that became a human consumption. Um, yeah, and so okay, these are the bad foods that is promoted by the establishment. And then of course, and anything related to sugar, right? I mean, I think that's the other big driver of obesity, where we know that it was the sugar industry that was funding those studies, that was blaming the fat, in
Mm-hmm.
particular the saturated fat. And actually, I mean, if you look at the total red meat consumption in the US, and I'm sure in other countries that are influenced by the same US food guidelines, we see very similar trends, is actually declining, right? So people are eating less, you know, red meat, so beef and lamb, um, than they did, a couple of decades ago. They're eating more chicken. Okay, that's probably somewhat benign source. Though maybe might not have all of the mineral profiles that you want in the red meat. But anyway, um, and egg consumption, I think probably is stable or maybe slight decline. And the issue is okay. Well, okay, so if you take the nutrient dense foods out of the equation, then by definition, I mean, you're going to have to fill your plate with something. I mean, people are not going to be starving. And then I think, and then the mainstream guideline is to say, well, why don't you fill your plate with the whole grains? Why don't you eat more brown rice and quinoa and whole wheat bread and whole wheat pasta? And then also, we want you to eat the fruits and vegetables. And actually, we do see an increase in the consumption also of these fruits and vegetables. But I wouldn't necessarily say that those are the malign forces. But I'm just saying that if you're taking away the nutrient dense foods, again, the red meats, um, that I think it's going to have, um, catastrophic effects on the health of the population. Because you're not just depriving yourself of the valuable nutrients, but you also, generate, basically the demand for, you know, for those lower quality foods. Um, and I know that a lot of vegans are gonna throw a spear at me for saying that rice and beans are starvation foods, right? I mean, if you consume that in large quantities, I think that it's not necessarily um, good or beneficial. I would say, uh, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. But do you have a take on this kind of like carb versus fat approach to the diet? Because I think that's where I mean, like within the health community, I think that's kind of where the big battle is being led, right? It's not so much about the seed oils or the ultra processed foods. Um, like is it like a relative weighting between the fats and the carbs?
Yeah, I think this is getting a little bit more into a technical aspect of foods. Um, so I think of it like this: is that your brain's number one source of energy to burn is going to be fat. So there are parts of the body where um, it has a preferred source just so it can get energized and fuel. Everything has a purpose. Fats are going to be more in calories than protein and carbs. So protein and carbs will be relatively the same. Um, with carbs, we're also using that as a form of energy, more so physical energy. And we do it because carbs is also a good way to confuse the body if you're doing any type of particular diet, where that's where a carb has a big form to play. It has a huge impact, I think, on metabolism. Um, I think of it like this: is that your body will tell you what you need and what it doesn't need when over a period of time after you eat it, after you eat good foods. Um, so people who particularly have more so a vegan diet or vegetarian, I know there's a little bit of a difference there, but I'm just speaking in a general sense here. A, a lot of it is going to be required on getting such a high intake of carbs that they don't always account for. So, if you're eating a very large amount of rice, quinoa, vegetables, whatever, you're just going to eat such a large amount of carbohydrates. And it's going to be very difficult for you to get your fat content in. I mean, very difficult. And on top of that, it's not like vegetables, um, even if you eat like fish, it's going to be hard for you to get that protein content on its own unless you're eating a very high volume of it. And if then you have to be more aware of things that are important, like I said, of the toxicity of some of the defense chemicals, as well as if you're a big fish or salmon person, not getting too much like mercury. It's so difficult. It makes your life so much harder. And then some people will say, well, I can just take a tablet. Well, I can just take this to get my vitamin intake. Well, let's think about it for a second. Okay, it's one thing if you have a religious belief, um, but it's another thing to do it just to do it. If you have to jump all of these hoops and sort of run around here playing such a game of taking this by this portion and getting this from my tablets, you tell me if that seems like a healthy thing, or do you feel good doing it? Because in what sense will using getting a pill to get your vitamins be better than something that would be not nearly as bioavailable as just simply eating foods that contain it? For example, liver has the highest amount of vitamins, very high in vitamin A. It will just have a very large portion of it. You pretty much meet your day's worth just eating, even 2 ounces of it. But if you have to take all these pills and you have to, resort to eating volume, and people who typically eat this type of lifestyle are usually going to be a bit skinnier, and it's going to be harder. I'm not saying impossible, but way harder to pack on muscle and to be very functional. And naturally, you're also going to emit more of a smell. So these are things you're going to have to be very, very accepting of if you do this. But if your answer to that question would be, um, I'm just going to do it and I'm going to accept the consequences, well, you're going to have to be ready because there's going to be a lot of things that you don't take into account for, like not eating enough, getting too much of one type of, getting too much of carbohydrates versus fat and protein. And it's not going to be, I think, the safest way to have your body running and be functional. So you just have to be willing and open to accept this. But the reality is, it's going to be very difficult to get those things. The problem also is people who do go this standard and believe in this diet so frequently, um, they don't even eat enough. That's the other issue. So not only do you have to account for the volume you have to eat, hoping that you don't get all of the negative toxins, as well as maybe some poisoning from eating some of the foods, you literally, people on the flip side, you literally are eating like a small bowl worth each and every day. So you're not even getting close to even 30 grams of protein, regardless of how much you weigh. I mean, just think about that. You're not even getting close to that even number. So your body in turn won't have a positive response to it. It just won't. And then on top of that, it gets even worse. Some of the places that people are eating at because they're not conscious of it is not going to be organic and is going to be sprayed with pesticides. So it's another double negative. So it's it's making it even harder for you to even be functional. I mean, at that point, like your body is really going to start disintegrating before your very eye. Not because of your belief or idea, but it's just factual. Like you're really eating like less than 500 calories a day, absolutely little to no vitamins and nutrition. You're not even close to hitting 20, 30 grams of protein. Like over a period of 5, 10 years, I mean, you're gonna get sick. I mean, there's really no it. It's most people naturally burn, um, around 1,000 or so, up to 2,000, maybe a little bit more calories per day, just doing nothing. So, and even if you do a little bit of activity, so if you're hitting close to like 500 calories, I mean, your body at this point is just going to eat itself. So that's where it becomes very, very dangerous. Is that I know people want to have an alternative, but you have to ask yourself, what really is the alternative? And as far as I've found or I know, there really is none. And that's what makes it dangerous, is when people start to play this game of, I can find a substitute, but then you realize what the substitute is, and then it's not even close to what they're doing. Um, it's just a recipe for disaster. So really, really ask yourself that question: is what is my goal and what am I getting it? Is it a substitute? And as far as I've known and I've found and what the data has shown, and told us, it's just a no. So please be careful. Please be mindful. But eating, particularly red meats, you get vitamins, you get nutrition, and remember, quality here. We're not eating. We're not trying to eat GMO raised, meat, or even chicken for that matter. We want to eat non-GMO, pasture raised, ideally organic. Um, so therefore, we're getting a really happy and healthy animal, that was humanely killed for a good purpose to give humans energy, so we can do our daily tasks and live very long lives and do productive things. And people who've gone through that path, they don't have to worry about this pill and that pill and, doing this and that. They just live their simple lives. And even people who don't even care about it, they're able to. I'm telling you, if you really incorporate the healthy and happy meats, all of a sudden, regardless of who you are, you're even somebody who weighs like 100 or 120 pounds, you're gonna be easily able to clear 60, 70 grams. So compared to somebody who can't even crack 20, so that's already a big difference. And then you don't have to eat nearly as much. The volume won't be as much because eating like 500 grams of quinoa is gonna take a toll on you, and we don't even know how healthy that really is compared to just eating 3 ounces of meat. I mean, 3 ounces of meat, and I get it, meat is thicker, but 1,000 grams of rice or bread or whatever just to feel satiated, and you're just not going to feel good even doing that. So
And plus, you're just gonna be less bloated if you eat the meat because I remember, I mean, I coming from an Asian household, I mean, kind of like r rice and wheat noodles are kind of staple foods, and I cut those out from the diet for the most part, and the biggest difference is that yeah, bloating went down significantly. Very high levels of satiety, right? Because you replace it with meats. And so certainly, I think a largely meat-based diet is very beneficial. But then I think that the discussion regarding, the grass-fed, grass-finished, right, versus the grain-fed beef. I don't know. I mean, I hear different kinds of messaging on that. I would say that if you can afford it, yeah, okay, go for the highest quality, for the grass-fed finished. Um, but it's still important to say that like even if you eat like the cheapest, lowest quality of meat, right? You know, I would still say you're going to be miles better off than eating, any of the ultra processed food or even some of the, you could say grain-based, plant whole foods. Um, so so that's why I would say I wouldn't necessarily just actively discourage people from eating, even like, cheaper cuts of meat. I think it's just important to state that if it is sourced from the animal, I think it is still overall a superior source of nutrition. But then again, but I think your argument was about, well, what's the most optimal
mm,
diet, and I think that's a fair argument. I'm not going to disagree with that. But again, yeah, but for most people, I mean, think of the 72% of the American population that are overweight or obese, right? People who have pre-diabetes, type 2 diabetes, and so forth. Like when they're listening to like what we're talking about here, they need to um they need to have like some practicable advice as to how they can lose their weight, and not just lose their weight but also keep it off, right? So you don't want this yo-yo diet effect, right, which oftentimes happens, I think, with kind of the Weight Watchers based approach where they give points for eating certain amounts of foods, right? And oftentimes, I mean, they're very low fat, very carb heavy kind of dishes that are recommended in those mainstream approaches. Um, and I think if you kind of go more the ketogenic diet, at least for a certain period of time, I think that the weight loss will be more effective. It will be much quicker. And I think you'll meet those energy targets more easily, um, um, because you always keep the insulin low, right? I mean, I think that's kind of I mean, the insulin, I think, is the main hormone that's going on in the background, and if you keep the insulin level low, then I think you're going to have less fat storage. You're going to be running on the ketones, mostly in fat burning, and you're going to have, and I think that's the meaning behind the consistent level of energy, right? So that's how you started our health discussion, right? Like, how do you maintain high continuous amounts of energy. And I think, the keto approach definitely is something that has to be considered, especially for people that are, dealing with weight issues. Yeah, satiety, long-term satiety. Do you have a take on fasting, intermittent fasting? I know that for Muslim people, like Ramadan is kind of
Right.
part of the regular program every year. But just like the physiological health-based argument around fasting, what's your take on that?
Yeah, so this is one that's a bit more very very debated, and a lot of people are kind of split on this. I think if you're fasting for a short period of time, particularly like Ramadan is for a month, um, it won't be a big deal, and in some cases, it could be a good thing for you. But I think, and this is what I ask people to kind of be more mindful of, is fasting for a very very long period of time um, could be detrimental. Um, I mean, the whole idea to restrict your body of food for a long period of time. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, we're talking about 1 or 2 years or more. When crossing that as a minimum threshold, when you do that for such a long period of time, I mean, the idea of fasting is your body is working so hard because it cannot rely on nutrition and resources because there's literally nothing to feed off of. So start burning its preferred source of energy, which is going to be fat, number one, and then it will start digesting its own um, resources inside the body, like your muscles. Um, and then I think stuff like that can be very very concerning because then eventually when you do eat food, it's going to be difficult, I think, to get that same satiating feeling if you're consistently, putting your body under such stress. And I think that's what people have to be mindful of to make progress. It's a parallel, like a parallel in life, right? We make progress when there's some sort of stress, when there's a deadline, when there's a goal we want to hit, because we need to hit it, and also that's how we progress. But if we're under such intense stress, particularly for a very long period of time, usually that does not work out well. And like it's like stress can make you and it can break you. And then if it breaks you, I mean, it can really break you. Um, so I think a good way to fast would be particularly towards the nighttime, as I mentioned earlier, is really between that. If you can get that two, and you can really go as much as like even 5 hours, because you're getting your body in a state of restlessness. Um, you're able to focus more, and then and your body's able to produce things that, especially if you're really young, like HGH, and just repair any injuries or bruises it has in its body, because it doesn't have to focus on digesting. It doesn't have to focus on any other thing except repairing. And a lot of that is done on an empty stomach. And that's where the benefit is. And that's where I would urge people to focus is I'm not a big fan of the morning fast because unless, I mean, even if it's a short period of time, that's one thing. But if you're doing a morning fast just to do it, I mean, you have to work out, you have to study and do this. And that pushes an additional stress on the body that's just not necessary, because you need to do things. You need resources. You need food to burn, and your body's already under stress, and now your mind is under stress. I mean, stress on top of stress, which is going to be amplified, I think, is just not going to have a good result in the long term. So that's just something we have to be very, very mindful and careful of. Too much of a good thing is not good. I mean, too much of a bad thing is going to be bad too. Um, but just be very careful and take a step back and assess what's happening. Is if you do decide to do this because you're a big believer in the fasting benefits, by helping you lose weight, by helping you reset your metabolism, by helping you whatever your belief is. If you're really strong on that, just assess how you're feeling and how you're doing. Because me personally, at a long period of time, I think it does become negative, to do such a thing. So unless that act is requiring you to do that towards the nighttime when we're able to rest and be in that, important position as I mentioned. So that's my personal take on it. I know people are going to defer and have their opinion. Um, but me personally, I just believe in doing things the right amount, not overdoing anything of any amount, and doing things that work and writing it down and collecting feedback so we can use it for our own personal gain in the future. Because a lot of people don't do that. Is that they'll do so many things at once and they won't know what works, so they just do everything at once. So see how it feels for you, see how you like it. If you like it, great. But just be mindful of doing it for such a long period of time.
Yeah, I think the main takeaway, like the n of equals one experiment. I think we all try the same thing and it has a different physical impact. And so therefore I think maybe there's no universal advice that can be given to people. I think people should try it out, see whether it works for them. Um, I mean, I do try to skip breakfast and have two meals, lunch and evening. And yeah, for some people it's like they want to have a really long fast because I think it takes 24 hours to clear out the glycogen stores, which is basically the energy that comes directly, I guess, from the food. Um, and only after that you can have the cell repair, right? Like the autophagy. But yeah, for me it would be very rough to go more than 24 hours, I would say. But I'm sure, like, with willpower, yeah, I mean, if you drink your broth, I don't know, it might be feasible. But yeah, like really long periods of fasting, I think I would agree it's going to be very tough. And I would say that if you, again, ketogenic diet probably is already mimicking some of that because, because you're going to have less of the glucose, less of the insulin spike anyways. You're going to be running under fat, yeah, primarily from the food, yes. But there'll be a little bit of fat burning from the tissue as well. Um, so yeah, I think I think it's an approach that I think people can certainly try out. Okay, and then the last point, and then we'll call this an end, but is going to be, yeah, we mentioned the exercise um regimens, and of course, like once you have, like, okay, if we assume that, like, you only put like high quality ingredients, right, high quality nutrition into your body, so now your body has all of this excess energy, and then you're going to have to put it towards something, especially physical, which is very tough for us because many of us are knowledge workers, like right now you and I are in front of a computer screen, so we are, you could say, chronically movement deprived. Um, yeah, I mean, what would be, in your view, like a workable regimen to, uh, I don't know, be physically active?
So I think the first thing is, so I'll say physical help, to be physically active, and also things to help your activity over time. I think the first thing is it's always in the beginning going to take more time to do something, especially that you're not used to. So make sure that you take the time to do that research, so you know what can end up working out for you. For me personally, after I eat the high quality foods and sleep well and try to practice some mindfulness and prayer, for me personally, I try to do little things like amplifying small things that can help me age well, small things that can help me grow well, small things that can help me recover well. I do believe in the power from the sun. And if I'm not out in the sun or I want to recover, I'll use red light therapy, just because the data on red light therapy has been very promising. And I'll turn my phone brightness low. And during nighttime, I'll put on the red light mode for my phone and my computer so I can access less blue light. So over a period of time, I'm accessing less things that are bad. I'm maybe it's not helping me, but at least going back to the addition by subtraction talk. Um, so I just do little things like that just to kind of help me be in that right state of mind to practice being healthy. Then when I work out, I try to have a consistent routine. My goal is just like Dr. Stuart McGill, who is the world renowned expert on back pain, who I believe he's recently retired, but one of the great doctors, um, who work on one of the biggest injuries in the world, which is a herniated disc. He says that the goal is to not do too much, but not too little. We want to find that sweet spot, and that sweet spot will take time. And you just have to be someone to put your ego to the side and pride to the side and be willing to find that sweet spot. Most people are not competing to be athletes in a major sport as their job. Most people are not competing to be a fighter of some sort, or most people are not competing to be an Olympian. If you do fall under this category where you are that, then maybe you do push a little bit of the limits. But again, even then, that has a potential negative side effect. But speaking in generality for people who are not going to be this, because I would imagine most people are not going to go for that type of lifestyle, you have to understand we're not trying to work out like it's the Olympics here. We want to do a workout to be productive, but we won't want to put too much stress in the body because we want to work out the next day and we want to be productive the next day. If we're going to the gym, like a lot of young people do, particularly even some people who were former athletes, or some people who just maybe they might have a bigger ego. Not saying they're bad, but I'm just saying maybe they have a bigger ego. They go in there and try to have like a 2 hour workout, everything you could think of under the sun, and then the next day they wake up sore and stressed, and that's not good. Because if we're working sore and stressed the next day, that means that day is going to be rendered a relatively unproductive day, no matter how you want to phase it, because your body needs more time to heal. So if it needs more time to heal, it cannot have a productive day. Hopefully, I think that should make sense. So we go in the gym, and for a relatively average person, we're going to have a nice 45-minute to an hour workout. We're going to hit really, maybe you could hit as low as 2 sets, you could hit as high as 4 sets. Everybody is different. Maybe you do a little bit more than four, maybe five max. But we just want to have enough to push the boundary of where we previously were, have a nice tension on that muscle for whatever that workout is. But we're not trying to be completely fatigued at the end of the workout and be very tired. And this is where that sweet spot I talk comes in, is that over a period of time, you'll understand for you what that sweet spot is, that you're happy and content with that workout and happy and content with that recovery. Because if we're working out very hard, or even as little as 30 minutes, if you're not sleeping well, I mean, practically you're undoing your exercise you had for that previous day. So for me, I like to have, as a 28-year-old man, who's been active for a very long period of time, I find my sweet spot to be having a nice 45-minute to an hour workout. And then I'll spend about 20 minutes um, usually doing some sort of like some type of swimming, or uh, weighted cardio activity. That's very light. That's never going to be pushing, because I have no reason to push the boundaries. I'm not competing for anything. And then I might do a light sauna session right after that. So we're talking about like an hour, 20, 25. And really, on my 1 hour workout, I spend like 20 minutes of that, 25, doing some sort of dynamic stretching, ab workout, and spine hygiene to make sure that I can have that workout. So really, going back to what I said before, really spending about that 30 to 45 minutes of a genuine workout. And then I spend the rest of that time doing things to help me recover right then and there. Because anybody can have a good workout. That's not the hard thing. The hard thing is the recovery. The hard thing is getting, that muscle repair, that muscle and mind connection to such a great level where it's harmonious, as I always love saying, where the next day you wake up, you're good to go. And you're doing enough to build muscle. You're looking great. You're losing the bad fat and losing the weight, gaining on good weight if that's your goal, and losing weight if you're trying to lose weight. That would be more on the cardio side, but weighted cardio side. But it's still like that would be the thing to be mindful of and pay attention to, and that's exactly what I do. So I find my sweet spot. Get home, have my recovery meal. Again, whole foods only, really no snacks, and then I practice that mindfulness before I go to bed, so I can get ready for that next day. And I would challenge people um, to see if this won't work for them, because I would find that really hard to believe. You will make results putting your body with the right amount of stress over a long period of time. Our goal is not to get a short. If you get short results, then usually they go away quicker. So just be a little bit more mindful of. Have a good pace, and I think that's really the way to achieve the best results. Especially, as I said, especially if you're not competing at such an intense level, which I would imagine most people are not.
Yeah, I think that's very good advice. I think, doing things in balance. For me, it's very practical because I have got a park right next to where I live, and the children's playground. I do a bunch of uh, pull-ups there. I try to do the push-ups. I do jump rope. I got the stretch bands, and that's oftentimes it's enough. I mean, I don't like bulk up a lot, but at least, like, it's not, like, my biceps is not completely soft like it was, during my college days when I didn't do any workouts. But yeah, I was very um much convinced of especially the weight bearing exercises, because yeah, because you hear about, like, older people that, fall down, right, and they get hurt, right, and oftentimes, I mean, the background is always the same, right? I mean, they might have, you know too much fat in the bodies, not enough muscles, they didn't train enough, and then over time, you're gonna have sarcopenia, right? You're gonna have the loss of muscle, um, and it is probably the case that, I mean, I think you could train at any age, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's just gonna get progressively harder, like, the later you start, right? Because you might max out with your muscles in your, early to mid 20s, and then every succeeding year of life, I think it just diminishes over time. So, um, and really all you're doing is, I mean, you're trying to preserve that muscle mass for as long as you can. And my brother recently said that, oh, but Arnold Schwarzenegger doesn't look as nice in his 70s as he did back when he was Mr. Universe, right, in his 20s and 30s. And yeah, maybe he doesn't, but he still looks strong, and I don't think that he or people of his tribe are necessarily gonna fall in the bathroom and crack their hips, right? So and that, to me, I think that's a big motivator, I think, for the muscle bearing exercises. Um, yeah, and then um and then the other thing I should add is again that in terms of like the weighting of diet versus exercise, I would probably say that the diet always comes first. Because because I do know quite a few people who they don't exercise a lot. They're quite obese, and oftentimes what they tell me is that, well, I try to go out there, I try to bicycle, I try to run, and then immediately, the knees start hurting, the hips start hurting, which suggests to me that like there's too much pressure, right, uh, on on those parts of the body, right, and so they're actually not able to do those exercises. And I think in that case, I would say that the focus should be diet exclusively at that point, right? And then once they like if they're sustainably down with the weight, and they start taking longer walks, and they realize, hey, my knees no longer hurt when I'm taking the walk. I think at that point, like I think the intense regimen that you mentioned, I think starts to become relevant to them, right? So kind of like building up, like if you start from zero, right? I mean, obviously, like if you're already very athletic, then just keep going, right? Just keep doing it. Um, I mean, I always like this idea of exercise. I mean, not so much just because for instance, do not get out of breath anymore when I run up flights of stairs. Um, but also like just the mental benefit, right? It's like I did something difficult today. And because we are knowledge workers, right? I mean, I type a lot of papers and stuff, and it's like oftentimes like in the day job you don't really feel like you accomplish something, right? Um, but I think if you accomplish something physical, right? If you went on like the half-hour run, and if you did this many push-ups, it's like you do pat yourself on the back in the sense that, like, yes, I did something difficult, right? So just like this this element of like discipline and reward, you could say, right? I think that's I think that to me is like the main driver for those exercises, right? Um, and I mean, like, do you tell yourself like motivational stories about like what you're trying to accomplish with your workouts, or it's just part of a general, healthy life style?
I think when I was younger, there was a lot of motivational aspects because I had a goal of trying to make an athletic accomplishment or join a team or be part of a club. But as I got older, now this is where it really starts to separate people and you start seeing less and less older people in the gym. There just becomes less of a need to do those things because you just don't have people to impress. And at that point, your goal has got to be to impress yourself or impress a loved one very close to you. So I think that makes it very, very difficult for a lot of people because they sort of don't feel the need to continue. And I think for me, once that point went away of emphasis of, oh, I need to work out or look good because of, a club or something to I can be a part of, and you just do it for yourself because you know that it might help you in your day-to-day activity and things like that. That is a different conversation, and I do it because that's what keeps me going personally, is because I have a belief in myself and confidence that I want to get to that next thing. And I think if people also have that same frame of mind, then they would continue and be able to do it. So that's what I see, and everyone is different, but it just becomes tough. And as you're saying, the body breaks down as you get older, and it just gets harder. All of a sudden, you're doing this much weight, or you're doing, this sprint in this activity, or whatever activity you're doing, all of a sudden your times are just going to be slower. And for some people, it could be frustrating and you just don't want to do it anymore. For some people, it can, be eye opening, and they just want to at least be healthy because it motivates them to, maybe keep breaking that barrier. And I think that's what that goal is of humanity, is to keep breaking that barrier, keep getting better, not only for yourself, but people around you. But it's got to start with you, because if you're not trying to impress yourself, if you're not trying to do it just because no one's watching, then it's going to be very hard for you to do it for a long period of time. And I think that's really what kept me going, because I've sustained injuries. I mean, if you train hard, it's going to be really difficult for you not to have an injury. It is. It just flat out is, especially as you get older. I mean, so if you are going for those things, just be mindful of it, be open to it. You don't have to always do a PR every lift, or even do a PR really forever if there's no need for it, you don't want to. But just be open to the idea that, hey, you're gonna have to do it, and you might not always have an audience. Um, I think that's what really kept me going, and I urge people to just be mindful you're doing it for yourself. Otherwise, it's going to be hard to continue, because there's going to be a lot of nights where, it might just be you, or, it's just going to have to be a tough workout. And there's just no amount of motivation, I think, that would get you through it over a long period of time.
Yeah, so I was listening to this Joe Rogan Experience podcast, and he's also like very much into like physical exercise and good diet and things like that. And he was kind of making that distinction between, motivation and discipline, right? Where basically like, motivation, it's like, if you want to do something really bad, then you'll do it. Um, and then discipline is like, if you don't want to do something, you still do it, right? And so, therefore, I think the mark of a like strong-willed personality, and for, I would say, also optimal health, both, mental and physical, um, I think is to be driven by discipline, more than by motivation. But I mean, I wouldn't say like don't have the motivation, right? I think you should have it. But sometimes, I mean, yeah, I mean, there can be bad days, right? Where it's like, oh, I don't feel like running today. And basically, I mean, like I've made it such that like the only excuse for not exercising is like, yeah, like if I'm traveling the whole day, right? Or if I have like a conference where I'm busy the whole day, or if I'm sick, right? Like physically. But other than that, I mean, I don't really, you know, uh, tolerate any excuses, quite frankly. I mean, I just, you put on the jogging shoes and then you go and run, right? So I think, yeah, so I think discipline probably is, in my view, I think it ranks higher than the motivation.
Mm.
Um, yeah, okay. So the very last point would be, yeah, because we touched on so many issues, right? So you have sleep, you have the diet, you have the exercise, and there's so many points. And of course, there's been many books that's been written on all of these topics. Um, but yeah, like for somebody who is like really, confused about this issue of health, like and they don't know where to start, like, what is it that you want those listeners to take away, um you could say about health journey.
I would say trust your body and trust your mind. I think inherently everybody has some sort of a healthy understanding, um, of like what will keep them going and what will not. And I think sometimes it can be obvious, and sometimes it's very hard, like Jeff Bezos says, it's very hard to maintain a grasp of the obvious at all times because of so many factors. We know whole foods are good. I think it's going to be hard for you to find someone to debate that. We know we need protein to build muscle. It's going to be hard to have someone debate that. We know good fats are different from bad fats, from healthy animals. It's going to be hard to find people to debate that. And we know that we need vitamins and antioxidants to be helpful and age well, and collagen and gelatin that we also get from sources like animals and bone. That's hard to get anywhere else. It's going to be very hard to have people to debate that. Use that instinctive information and use sometimes that obvious understanding and your body's knowledge. What I mean by your body's knowledge is it will start to inform you when things are bad and things are good. And that's when the body and the mind have that special connection where you're able to think deeper and deeper. And as long as you write it down, or you're more aware of it, which a lot of people are not, just because they're worried about other things, then you'll be able to make good decisions. And I really do think sometimes it can be that simple. Is you avoid snacks, you avoid snacking. I think discipline is a different question. If we're asking me just a generality, this is what I would give. You just need discipline. You just got to do it. Okay, there's no if, ands, or buts. But removing that from the equation, to eat whole foods. To not eat too late to bed. To be mindful of overdoing anything. This. Okay, we inherently understand this. What we need to do is we need to start executing. Maybe you're in school and snacks and pizza and all that stuff is still around us. We need to have an ability to just be like, I'm either going to take none or I'm going to take few. Okay, you just have to know that. And then when you go to a dining hall, wherever, again, whatever is accessible to you, because I agree, I don't want to talk very maybe disrespectfully to some people because they don't have access to this, and I do want to be mindful of that. But whatever you have access to, there's always a way to make a good choice. Okay, because rarely are you going to be in a setting, that you have to, you know, pick only bad options. Okay, it's not going to happen as much because you're just not going to be always presented in that notion, in that frame of mind, but also in that setting. So make sure that you're going for those whole food sources. Make sure that you're making that right and healthy, conscious decision. You're not overdoing anything. You're not eating too close to bed, and you're practicing mindfulness and restlessness so you can repair your body after a good workout. You're not working out too hard in the gym either for a long period of time, especially if you're a student. You just know these things. So I really do think sometimes it's that obvious. And sometimes it's difficult to know which science is telling the truth because, whether you're looking at the NHS or every study that's been done from every country, there's so many variables that even the timing is different. But I think you instinctively trust yourself. If you're eating something and you don't feel good, you feel weak, listen to that and pay attention to that. And sometimes you have to isolate things to know what particularly is causing maybe you to have not good results, and maybe what is causing you to have good results. You isolate those things and you experiment and you write it down. You have some sort of log for that, and from then on you build off that and you make good decisions, because life is really just a lifelong experiment that we run on each other. And you have to know, you have to run those experiments. I mean, if you don't run an experiment, well, you're never going to know what works. So that's why you got to take that job. That's why you go to that school. That's why you do what you do, and you write it down so you know what works. So that's what I would tell people is don't overcomplicate things. Have a firm grasp on the obvious. And then if you become more advanced and more interested, then you can do those little things to get bonus points and build off of. So start small and then you can finish big.
Yep, I think that's very good advice. And like, yeah, this idea of experimenting, I think that's really important, right? That, like, if you are on an unhealthy track, try something different and see whether it works. And that's where I think a lot of the carnivore supporters actually are saying that that their approach is like the elimination diet, as they call it, where I mean it's the like the basic idea is that meat is the, relatively speaking, the least inflammatory food input. And so people, if people strip down to the meat-based diet, and then first they have to wait for the, like, any negative symptoms that they have, right? Like insulin resistance, or for women it's like PCOS, right? Inflammatory bowel conditions, right? I mean, all of these things, like, they would have to see whether those symptoms, those negative symptoms, subside, and then if it does subside, then they reintroduce other foods, like especially the plant foods, again, but only the whole foods, back into the diet. And then if they feel like it is getting better, or if it stays good, then those then all of the foods they're eating are good. If they have a flare up of bad symptoms, then they have to cut it back out again. But just knowing that there is such a thing as an elimination diet, I think that itself is, I think, quite empowering to people, right? Um, okay, yeah. So I think that that's all I wanted to discuss, and of course, hopefully we'll have another podcast again, and we'll discuss many more topics, or we can go in more depth about around these health issues. Um, unless there's something else that you want to bring up in the discussion.
No, I think the one thing, and maybe if I didn't do this at the beginning, apologize to the listeners, but just like a little bit about my background is I was a student who graduated in finance, and I was a very, very unhealthy person. I was really struggling. I think I was losing really a lot of natural oils that's being produced from my body. I was losing collagen, and I was just aging really rapidly. I gained a lot of weight. So I think for me, even though I'm not a medical professional, for me, I did a lot of personal self reflection and self study and analysis. And I found things for me that work to help me get some of my hair back, to help me sort of, reduce or go anti aging, if you will, and sort of reduce those negative effects that I've kind of put on myself with a very slight, maybe even ability to reverse it. I've just been practicing and been mindful of that, and that's kind of where my position is. So I've studied this for many many years now, um, really since since I kind of had a bad health journey since right after I graduated college and just kind of went through that scape. So I understand where people are coming from. So that's just sort of my background and my information. So hopefully that kind of helps people to understand why I know what I know and I, do what I do. So I can go definitely more in depth, but just for the viewer's sake, I just wanted to kind of keep it, very simple because, I think really that's how it starts.
Yeah, okay. I think you do have to dwell on it just another minute, because so you have a personal health journey, and what was the main concern there? Was it just about, like, weight issues? I mean, or
Oh, I mean, it was
uh,
everything you could think of. I mean, I was the thing is, right now I'm actually about 170 pounds, and for me, that's the heaviest I've ever been. But a lot of people tell me that it doesn't even look like I'm heavy. Before I was like 170 at my worst. I'm actually experimenting in being at 170 now, just an FYI. But I was 170 before, but I was very bloated, losing, like I said, losing hair. I had a thyroid issue. Usually, it's very easy to see thyroid by looking at someone's eyes. When the eyes bulge out, usually it can indicate that there's some health issues. not sleeping well, a lot of discoloration in my skin, particularly a lot of dark circles. And that's just a sign of being um, very unhealthy, not enough rest, and your body's basically just not, producing enough collagen and healing itself because every day your body is able to fight off a lot of things from infections to acne to repairing itself. And I just wasn't able to do that at such a high level. But knowing what I know now and being very careful and, taking my, my microdosing of vitamins, I take aspirin whenever I get hurt. Sometimes I microdose aspirin just to get some of the health benefits. You know, start oiling my hair, do a little bit of, rosemary oil blend. I take advantage of animal-based skincare just because it's kind of helped me put on a shine, and it also helps me reduce aging and release vitamins in my skin. I've done this over a period of time after I learned all the basics, and I think it's really made a difference in my health that I'm able to maintain such a good frame. I'm able to be heavier, but I'm able to more control the weight because I think it's one thing to be heavy, but I think it's another thing to be heavy and not have control of the weight. And I happy to say even though I'm a little bit heavier and I'm testing it out like everything I've mentioned before I do experiments, I'm just making sure that I'm feeling well and I can do those things well. So I've been doing that for a long period of time. My before and after is pretty noticeable. I was able to grow a beard even though I literally had like no hair on my face for a long period of time. I just started looking at the studies and saw peppermint oil and found a way to increase facial hair and eyebrow hair and get my hair back. And I've just done that for for years now, and the results have been very good and steady. And if people who know me or have seen me before, they always can vouch for the results that they've seen me back in 2019, 2020, and it was looking rough to put it lightly. And then 2025 or 2024, excuse me, and going to 2025, like I'm looking invigorated. I just took a picture for my ID right after I had turned right around 28. And if you compare it to my ID at 18, I'm really happy to see that it's a very, very small difference. And that just goes to the effort that I had put in for, um, I would say put on an effort really since 24 or 5, but I've really taken it seriously going on from sort of that 26 and a half, 27. So for a year now, it's been really a serious dedication. So yeah.
Yeah, and then, I mean, yeah, you look very good, and so I think that the uh, like it then makes you kind of a disciple, right? Where you're just like, well, if my health is getting better, and I see so many like sick, like metabolically sick people all around me, like, is there a way how I can help them, right? Is there a way how I
Hmm.
can convert them
Hmm.
to my cause as well? And and I have a similar level of commitment. I mean, but during my college days, I mean, I think my peak weight was like 200 pounds, and so now it's like 160, 158 or something. So, um, and energy level is good. The bloating is down. I think those are kind of the main things for me that changed. And yeah, you try to um tell as many people as you can, and hopefully it works. And I think that's kind of like back to the politics, the health politics point, right? Where you're saying that RFK is not going to fix the entire health infrastructure of the country, right? Because not so much because he and his team don't have the dedication for it, but rather because um, because the federal government is like a huge ship, right? There's a lot of people in it. There's a lot of vested special interests, right, that want to keep the status quo. And so, but then like the antidote to when we started today's podcast about like education, right? The education piece, right? Where, isn't it the case that like if we empower people with the health education, right? That it doesn't matter how corrupt the health authorities are. You know, people will be ingesting the right kinds of foods.
Mhm.
They'll be exercising and they'll be sleeping well and so on and so forth. And yeah, and then yeah, and then and then we'll be able to achieve the goal of like a more healthy society, a more thriving society, right? So yeah, I think it's a good roundup. Yeah, health and education. I think that's those are um certainly belong together, right?
Right, exactly. You nailed it on the head. When more people know about it and they care and they protest or more mindful, I think then at least you can hope and actually be reasonable to see change coming. I mean, the sad thing is even children in school nowadays. I mean, to say the school lunch in public schools is bad is an understatement. I mean, it's straight up. I mean, they're straight up. When I was going to school in Philadelphia in middle school in those days, I mean, they would serve as like heated food from plastic. I mean, like it's dangerous isn't even the word to explain how bad that food was. But you just have to be very mindful of it, and if you care, a difference can be made. But it's unfortunate because there's a lot of things people fight about, and sometimes people pick and choose the battles, and but health has sort of been under the radar for such a really long period of time, and that's really unjust, and it's a shame.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, well, I mean, it's good. Well, you're also from Philly, right? So that's the first city that I moved to when I came to this country. And I did go to the public schools as well, the Northeast, and yeah, and I always remember in a lunchroom, they would have, the longest line where you had to wait for the longest was the sandwich line. Because they would have to add like all of the ingredients manually, right? Like, whatever the ham and the cheese and so forth. And that was probably like the least bad food in the cafeteria.
Right.
And then you have a fast food line, so where they serve the pizzas and the hot dogs, right?
Mm.
And the hamburgers. And those were really quick, right? Because because the pizza was already on that plate. So you just go and grab it. And of course, and then with the timing thing, I mean, you could already see where the incentives were, right? So if I'm a student and I'm like, well, I don't want to wait for a bloody long time on this lane. Um, I just want to, get in and out quickly. Um, yeah, you just go for the fast food lane. And then there, I mean, I already saw, okay, this is, structurally the way how they designed the lunchroom. They're they're basically incentivizing the kids to be unhealthy. Um, and yeah, and so and that was in the late 2000s. I mean, we were 15 years ago. So um, and I don't think things have gotten better in the recent past. So um, there's this one food activist, Nina Teicholz. She's a food journalist. Um, and she turned her health around, I think mostly in the ketogenic diet, whole foods. And now she's trying to, through her organization, the Nutrition Coalition, tries to change the food guidelines, right? And the food guidelines are very important because they go into um, everything that is served in school lunches and stuff.
Hmm.
And so there's an effort now to try to change those food guidelines to
Hmm.
include mostly whole foods, to also promote meats and animal sourced foods. Um, and that little change, right? It's not even like jiggering with the subsidies on food and agricultural products. It's just like basically like the sheet of paper that the government prints out that has that food pyramid, the triangle, and then just changing the contents of what is in that pyramid that by itself would have a
Mm.
substantial impact on the health in this country. Um, yeah, because then all of the government organizations have to follow those guidelines, right? So yeah, those are like technocratic changes. I think they're very cheap to afford. Um, okay, so then we'll call the podcast an end. So thank you, Aman, for taking the time on this discussion.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, and appreciate the viewers for listening. Um, I just ask everyone, just be mindful of your health, and just ask questions. And, don't be afraid to, seek the answer, even if it's one you don't like.
That's great. Yep.